Hello, everyone, and welcome. David Serpa at eXp Realty here, and we are reading chapter 14 of my new book, All the World's a Stage, Unmasking Asperger's Syndrome or Autism Spectrum Disorder or High-Functioning Autism or whatever it is they're calling it. I tend to be a little long-winded. This is perhaps the most vulnerable chapter of my book and the most important to me, so it's also a little bit longer. So chapter 14, very excited to share this with you. Undiagnosed Autism Spectrum Disorder. Since my coming out video, where I told the world I have Asperger's or Autism Spectrum Disorder, was shared multiple times, I have had people share their stories with me from all over the country. I'm not worldwide or anything, but I'm doing some good. Friends have contacted me, then friends of friends, and today I was contacted by Psychotherapist that specializes on Asperger's out of Solano Beach, California. I was nervous to tell her that I had not yet been diagnosed with Asperger's. I told her anyway. She responded that many adults go undiagnosed and that I did a great job describing all of the characteristics in the video and that she wants to continue with the interview. There's currently such a heated debate in the autistic community over self-diagnosis that I think it's disgusting. Asperger's looks different on many people. In fact, it looks different on everyone. It is called a silent disorder because you can't tell if someone has autism by looking at them. For those of us not looking for aid, but for understanding for ourselves, it can feel like murky waters. With an average diagnosis taking 2 years, it is no wonder that many of us choose to stay out. There's also a negative stipulation that goes along with having Asperger's, that we are broken or need to be cured. In The Autistic Brain by Temple Grandin, she dives into the complexities and the strengths of the autistic brain. She explains with science why her brain works the way that it does. She elaborates further on her first book, Thinking in Pictures. She gives very little room for speculation, but instead makes several founded hypotheses for why we act the way that we do. One of Grandin's points is that we focus far too much on the diagnosis and not enough on the symptoms. She writes on this far more elaboratively than I'm capable of, and in far more depth than I will give you from my pages. One of the examples that she gives is of a boy with Asperger's that has digestive issues. Too often, once we find the autism diagnosis, we say, oh, that's the cause. And then we disregard further contemplation for a remedy for the digestive issues. We don't look at the diet. We don't look at the body. We label it and we move on instead of worrying about which label fits and go into those symptoms, treat the stomach problems, and find out what is causing the anxiety. Address each symptom and learn to understand the cause. Things don't just happen. I don't enjoy the debate currently in the ASD community against self-diagnosis. I am in agreement with Carrie Beckwith Fellows with what she said in her TED Talk, Invisible Diversity, a story of undiagnosed autism. She is a fellow Aspergian that went undiagnosed for 35 years. I am 33 years old and I am still undiagnosed. I have no interest in pursuing a diagnosis, as I have read enough and studied enough to understand where I fit and have no interest in receiving government assistance. I know who I am and don't need to spend any time or money convincing a therapist. I would have to choose to present my autism to them over time. There's a difference between the thinking self and the acting self, as Temple Grandin puts it in her book, and it keeps many Aspies off the radar. My thinking self. The wheels are always turning. It is everything left unsaid or undone. It is the extra work I put into my surroundings to conceptualize it and keep up or slow down. My acting self, the image that I'm portraying to the world or what breaks through that I can't control. This is what people see. Working to keep my thinking self and my acting self in line can be exhausting. If I'm around too many people or just the wrong kind of people, I am tired from the constant energy that it takes to keep up my defenses. It is much less exhausting being my authentic self. I get to do the closest thing I do to relaxing. I get to be me. The problem is many of us have gotten very good at presenting or masking or presenting the acting self, whether it is squeezing my fingers together to keep from stimming or learning to look away so that I don't stare into people's eyes too intensely when we're having a conversation, or just working to not come off as condescending when I think I have all the answers. I have to work to come across as something other than I am. It is normal to mask. In fact, I think we all do it. It is just putting your best foot forward. It does, however, present an interesting conundrum. The more we mask, the more difficult it is to get a diagnosis and figure out who the hell we actually are in relation to the rest of the world. In the 1990s, there was significantly less patience for young men that weren't presenting the quintessential image of masculinity. I started enjoying theater in third grade when I started in a local melodrama, and I never stopped enjoying the stage and everything around it. I enjoyed reading plays, taking classes, attending the theater. To this day, I enjoy the theater crowd more than most. They enjoy what is alive and breathing, and they are much more accepting of weirdos. The theater exposed me to facial expressions, feedback, and it helped to encourage me to take risks in a safe setting. It was full of men that would pretend and act and play like children. Everywhere you looked, you found people dedicated to the crafts of lighting and stage design. It was a safe haven for me. It also gave me the ability, strangely enough, to fit in. Contrast that with the sports crowd. I would show up in jeans and everyone else would be wearing baseball pants. I didn't know anything about baseball, nor did I find it interesting. It moved at a snail's pace with bolts of action, and 50% of the time, someone was disappointed in your team. I love basketball, but still, it is a different world. I felt more ostracized than accepted playing athletics, and I was always highlighted. I don't fit in with the crowd for long periods of time. I don't like being made fun of, and I don't like seeing other people being made fun of. Sure, I can take a teasing too far with people that I love, but I don't pick on people. I don't like creating victims, and I've never understood the mentality. The problem with most athletic squads is that they're built on competition instead of camaraderie. As someone who coaches, there is a massive difference between how those two squads perform when it comes to crunch time. Competition creates pecking orders, which encourages hostility and prevents healthy growth, whereas camaraderie encourages the whole squad to be better and look for the right person for each job. I can point to a team after team that understood camaraderie over competition in the championships and Super Bowls that were earned with this mindset. Whether we are being encouraged to fit in or being ostracized for being different, the message was very clear that we don't want you to be different. In the movie Idiocracy, an average man is sent 500 years into the future. He is mocked relentlessly for talking like a faggot, and they make fun of him for using big words. This was high school for me. A bunch of people trying to stay in the middle of the pack, celebrating idiocy and mocking anything different. Unfortunately, I have a desire for sameness, just like everyone else. I had an extraordinarily pretentious high school yearbook quote I picked out of a book called Winesburg, Ohio, by Sherwood Anderson. It just seemed apropos at the time. I have a desire to make you admire me. That's a fact. I don't know why. I saw those three sentences strung together and they popped out at me. I didn't like 90% of the people that I went to high school with, but I still wanted to be accepted by them. That's what makes the diagnosis hard. We have a desire for sameness. We want to find people we can bond with over common interests, but more often than not, the exposure to these human beings at the high school level of education is not easy to find. So we either alienate and remove ourselves entirely, or we work to fit into the herd. Alienation in high school is like alienation in prison. Masking destroys the ability to give an accurate diagnosis, but increases the ability to get through life. Young girls will dress like other young girls. Little boys will hold up the image of bravado that is celebrated by their young peers. My dad used to lecture me for long periods of time, and he would say, "Look at me." And he would say it over and over again. I learned to stare into people's eyes. By telling me if you would just sit down and be quiet, I would be done already, and then proceeding to lecture me for 20 more minutes, I learned to stop stimming by squeezing my fingers together or by sitting on my hands. I was being conditioned to fit into the world. The problem is that masking is exhausting. Whenever I am out, I am doing my best, regardless of whether or not I am having fun. I am processing everything, and I'm taking everything in. Keeping up a facade for the world while continuing to cope with everything going on can make you slip. In the slip is where we often find the misdiagnosis. When the misdiagnosis comes from the outside, the world is only getting what they are being told. If it's a distracted kid that can't keep eye contact and stims, well, he's ASD. If he's violent at all, oh, he's ADHD. If he's an adult with no filter that has friends, but has outbursts or depression issues, he's bipolar. If the same person is a girl, she has anxiety. If he has trouble sleeping, he's this. We rarely take in the whole picture and look to understand the cause and effect. Why not? This may take years of talk therapy, being observed in a natural setting over time, or genuine self-awareness. My self-diagnosis was very thorough. It was quite the year of self-discovery for me. I went through a divorce, I moved, stepped away from my business, and I had a complete meltdown. I was searching for answers everywhere and getting many of the wrong ones. As far as I was concerned, I was looking for a manual that would explain me in a way that I made sense so that I could do a better job fitting into the world. My Myers-Briggs test showed that I was an ENTP, which led me to investigate and study similarly designed people and read their biographies. Lots of extraordinarily principled people that continued to greatly do things for the world, but often died alone and not well loved by their families. We're ENTPs. What was it about me that makes me so hard to love? What was it about me that makes me too much? As I wrote earlier in the show Parenthood, it had planted a seed a few years prior. I have heard of a few other people saying the same thing. I realized my husband might have Aspergers after watching Parenthood. I think that the show did great things for the ASD community as a whole. From the child Max to the adult Hank, we see what Aspergers or autism looks like in a family and in the world as a subplot in the program. I was misdiagnosed by a student in a hallway at the VA after checking myself in. I was not seen by a doctor or a PA the entire time I was there. I left with a bag of medication to treat different anxieties, help me sleep, and a bunch of other meds without having a real conversation with anyone. They even brought up narcissism. I tried on these diagnoses. I dove deeply into bipolar 2 and was ready to embrace it, but my wife and I knew it didn't fit. On a whim, I decided to research Asperger's. The floodgates opened, and I made sense to me for the first time in my life. I felt less like an alien and more like a person with sensory issues. More could be explained. I kept it to myself for a little while, trying the shoe on. I researched, read, watched, studied, and theorized. I called my mom, who's been working with adults with disabilities for over 20 years. She immediately embraced it. My wife would love to have me see a specialist and get diagnosed, but for me, it's a connection, and I now understand myself. For the record, that has now changed too. She's very happy where we're at. I don't need to be tested, analyzed, and given a stamp of approval by someone at the VA who would not have given me the time of day when I was at the end of my rope. There's a great illusion in the ASD world that somehow we are all going to be accepted and that everything will be okay. The difficulty with taking your mask off is that it leaves you open to the judgment of the people around you. It leaves you open to being misunderstood, which is one of the harshest sentences for a person with Asperger's. If someone hates me, and I just prefer that they would hate me for me, just don't misunderstand me. By continuing to discourage people to self-diagnose, we encourage people that know who they are and see answers for the first time to pump the brakes. I watched a documentary about two adults that believed they were on the spectrum, and they agreed to be put through a series of tests. Like a rose on a dating show, they were given the results. The results, you were on the spectrum. The problem with this sort of diagnosis, these people already knew they were autistic. They felt it at their core. However, they were still relieved a great deal when they were given the results. They felt validated. Giving people an opportunity to validate you also gives them the opportunity to put you under the microscope. I hear these horror stories, and I don't want to be one of them. I don't want to be fed a bunch of lines about what I am and what I am not by a medical student. This sort of judgment and haphazard medicine is one of the reasons 22 veterans a day are killing themselves. And the number one cause of death amongst people with autism is suicide. It is easy to hate when you don't understand. And I believe that applies to ourselves. If we can't understand why we are doing what we are doing, how can we ever have compassion for ourselves? If we don't understand that sensory overload is not something that everyone has to deal with, it is easy to be disappointed in ourselves for not being able to stay out all night. I'll give you a somewhat funny story that some of you will find disappointing. I went to my first strip club at 32 years old. It was also my last strip club. I lasted about 15 minutes. It was incredibly overwhelming. And to give you an idea of how awkward of a vibe I must give off to the world, a topless woman who was older than I was started talking to me about President Trump. Why do I give off the let's talk politics vibe in a strip club? A lot of men love strip clubs. I find them repulsive for several different reasons. My 15 minutes inside confirmed everything I thought I would find distasteful about strip clubs. Lights were flashing. The environment was dirty, everyone's motivations were sad, and the music was so loud that I could barely hear my new friend talking to me about her opinions on President Trump. It was overwhelming on every capacity, and I ended up out front with my headphones on, calling an Uber with a couple of friends that probably noticed it wasn't the right environment for me. Throughout the course of my life, my bachelor party, the Marine Corps, hanging out with a bunch of hyper-motivated entrepreneurs, I have always been surrounded by men that enjoy the hunt. Whereas I have always been a bit of a serial monogamist. A lot of my exes like to think of me as this little broken bird that they found. They find me an antisocial overthinker with a chip on his shoulder and think that over time they will be able to smooth my edges. I do my best to learn the new rules of the new relationship that come into my life. I am a people pleaser, and I have always been a bit of a romantic. I love Shakespeare. I love music. I should have been fine with any relationship. That's a big fat negative. One of my many relationships problems is that I say what is on my mind. Many people have their "you were a dick" stories about me when they first met me. People say that I blew them off or was rude. People get excited to meet me. I come off as a nice guy online, very personable. I care about people in general, but individuals can become tiresome. I love mankind, but very few people in my life are close to me. So when a new person that has been listening to my podcast or reads my blog or that I'm friends with on Facebook comes up to me and they are excited to meet me, I don't know how to pick up on the visual indications that they are excited to meet me, especially when I'm in a crowded room. There's too much going on. And a lot of times I'm already plotting my moves through the room that I have to make to get to an exit. If I want to get to an exit, I often have to plan in advance because people stop to talk to me several times along the way. See, I sound like a dick. I get it. I don't like that I come off like this, but it won't likely change. If I don't talk about it, it also won't help you. I don't mean to do it. It's 7:38 a.m. and the birds just started chirping. And I told the birds to shh. I might just be a dick. I need to give you practical examples of the dick in action. I was at a function or another. Another agent that has done very well for himself approaches me to introduce himself. I hadn't recognized the name. I asked his production, Volume in Homes, that he sold over the year prior. He told me, and he had beat me by about $1 million. I said, "Damn, you beat me." And I walked off. Weird, right? I don't remember the occasion. I never do. This is a story that he told me. I can assume that there were a lot of people at the function, that there was a lot going on. I never focused on another agent's production that were underneath me. I only focused on the one agent that was beating me out of the 4,500 realtors in the area. I didn't recognize the name as he was not in the same multiple listing service, and I don't pay attention to social media. I just post what I want and read very little of it. I use it as a way to connect with interesting people, not read about what boring people ate for lunch or where their kids are taking karate classes. I'm not tapped into the realtor underground of who's who because I don't care. And I don't like to talk about people. I like to talk about production. I don't know what was going on through my head, but I may have been stopped several times in a row. I may have needed to pee and thought I was being funny. I may have just not realized he wanted to talk to me and moved on. I'm a weird dude. Another agent recalls to me about how I told her that she should join another team. Again, I don't remember this story. And I would suggest to people that they should work on another team regularly. I pay attention to the language that people use and patterns in the way that people act, and I don't hire people that break certain rules. My team was amazing. We were go-getters. Everyone wanted to be a part of what we had going on. I was protective of it. When people started asking me about how they were going to get on my team, and when people started asking me about what they were going to get when they got on my team, I just wouldn't hire them. I don't hire people that start in with, "How many leads do you provide? How much mentorship can I expect? What will you do for me?" I hire realtors that are grateful for the opportunity and are anxious to rise to it. I suggest that they go to my mentor's team, as he is more hands-on and will, quite frankly, take the agents that I won't. And she still thinks that I was a dick, but she moved past it, and now we work together on another company. People often write to me with lunch and coffee invites, and I blow them off. My good friend and fellow Marine often tells a story about how I blew him off for several months but he was persistent, and now we're good friends. It's true. I love the guy. I enjoy his brain. I want to have him around when I'm speaking, and I want him to hear me speak. But if I took every lunch date and every coffee date that I was offered, I would be strung out on caffeine, overweight, and anxious, even more anxious. If I walk up and shake someone's hand and say, "It's good to meet you," people often respond to me, "We've met before." I have had person after person feel offended that I don't remember meeting them or working with them. I understand where they're coming from. I learned by watching clips of President Obama that he would say, "It's good to see you," which kept him completely off the hook for having to remember faces. I loved it. Brilliant. So now I say, "It's good to see you," and I wait for them to tell me how we know one another, or if we have met before. I am good in short bursts. I am even good over time. Chances are that people that know me well will see me get frayed at some point or another. It took some PTSD to push my sensory overload and my depression to a point where I couldn't handle it anymore. Things I used to be able to take in passing or deal with started to grate on me. The little sounds were a little more of an issue. The smells were way more of an issue. And it took a few years and a few more deaths to push me over. People became almost impossible for me to deal with, and the headphones were more necessary than ever. I could no longer handle the idle time because it felt like I was waiting to die. I didn't want to live my life for no reason at all. I couldn't deal with the superficial talk that I had always struggled with, and I could no longer keep up the facade. I was not okay with the idle superficial talk. I did not like the vain and vapid reality TV. I openly despised the people I used to be able to stomach, and I lost my ability to mask. I lost my identity through a divorce, my team shattering, and I no longer was at a point where I could process what was going on with the world. My purpose that I found in real estate was gone. My identity as a husband was gone. My leadership as a team lead was dwindling. I grew existentially exhausted. It was a very lonely world being an Aspie. If you don't have your identity based in something, your connection to the world is gone, and therefore your connection to yourself feels empty. A lot of control issues in the Aspie world can lead to destructive behavior, like eating disorders and self-harm. When you can control nothing around you, you work to control something. I remember growing up poor. We had very little. We lived in shelters with friends, in Section 8 housing, etc., and we were on food stamps at one point, and I was very uncomfortable. I remember going to school and getting free lunch and receiving a different colored ticket. I just decided that I would stop eating lunch. It wasn't until much later as an adult that I realized that in times that I had very little control of my life, I will exert control over my situation by not eating food. This does not reach into anyone else's diet. It's just something that I do. This can be an issue for me because high stress causes the body to have digestive issues anyway. When I go through a high stress time in my life, my body has trouble digesting food and I have stomach problems. When I know that food will make me sick or make me wake up several times in the night to use the bathroom, I just don't eat. And sometimes I will go a good portion of the day without eating. This triggers acid reflux, which makes it difficult for me to want to eat. I've always had a strange relationship with my body, but I will go into that more in the next chapter. I've never been someone who self-harmed in the traditional sense, but I know that it happens at an alarming rate amongst people with autism. In fact, it was published in Spectrum News that a study was done that showed that teens with autism are 28 more times likely than their peers to commit suicide. The stress that we live in also causes us to die, on average, 10 years younger than our neurotypical counterparts. I have read about the benefits of Prozac and other prescription medications, but until I see a doctor that is interested in understanding the complexities of me, I will pump the brakes on the assembly line medicine. I think we have many men and women serving their country that have Asperger's. In the speech put up by Generation Next on YouTube, Professor Atwood gives one of my favorite speeches on Asperger's entitled, "Could It Be Asperger's?" He brings up an interesting statistic. He believes approximately 15% of law enforcement officers would be found to be on the spectrum if tested. I think he is 100% correct. There are a lot of young men and women that decided to serve this country because of their wiring, not despite of it. I think there are a great number of men and women that are suffering with PTSD and are having trouble separating it from the ASD symptoms that they were born with, that were perhaps highlighted by the exposure to the military. Let me explain. There's a great deal of a need of cohesion or sameness amongst people with Asperger's. We crave the tribe atmosphere. We want a bond that people that would know we're weird but are willing to die for us anyway. The structured military lifestyle can be very appealing. If given the right MOS and the right leadership, a person on the spectrum can thrive in military service. Temple Grandin brings up in her book that people on the spectrum can handle loud noises if they are the initiator, or can be desensitized over time. As a machine gunner, I was firing the biggest weapon on the battlefield. There were very few exceptions, but not many, and I adjusted well. I have heard of Marines, though I have seen none personally, that have locked up, covered their ears, or rocked during combat. We see this in several war movies. The young soldier, shell-shocked, exposed to combat for the first time, covers his ears and rocks back and forth. I believe many others do exceptionally well in combat-related jobs because they are control-based. Another topic that Temple Grandin brings up is the enlarged amygdala. She constantly feels the threat of danger. She can't sleep if she hears talking, as there's potential threat present. I had so much trouble sleeping in Afghanistan that I lost a tremendous amount of weight and constantly was up on the roof overlooking the surrounding areas if there was an issue. This is the way that I've been my entire life. It was not something that was set off by combat, only exacerbated by it. I'm the first one out of bed and the last one back in it. We are great in nature. We are calm. We have a great eye for detail. We see the anomaly in the baseline and we help to keep people alive. We have a profound sense of right and wrong. We are students of history and understand the importance of gathering intelligence. In a lot of ways, the military was great in rounding me off in the ways that theater could not. I have always been a bit of a drifter. I wear thin on places and on people. I change jobs and interests, and so I keep to myself for periods of time. I have worked in retail, fast food, in film and television, real estate, the Marine Corps, construction, and grocery, on a farm, doing yard work, and as a co-owner of a brokerage and an escrow company. And I have left several jobs out. Everything gave me an experience and something that I learned and that I took with me that made me a better person, a better employee, and now a better business owner. We fit into these little niches in the world where we get to make the world a better place, wherever that is. We don't need to get lost in what the expectations are, just where we are comfortable and can best serve others while not forgetting ourselves. I've looked at my self-diagnosis as a key. I know where I lack, and I have a general idea of where I am good and even exceptional. I have a better understanding of my deficiencies now, and I don't hate myself for them. My wife runs the money in the house. I concentrate on my piece of making it. That's okay. My wife understands that if she doesn't remind me to eat, that I will forget to eat. She keeps an eye out for me when the kids start being overly repetitive or obnoxious, and she helps to soften it. I love my kids being obnoxious, but grading is difficult to deal with. My point is, I do a better job of looking out for me, and she looks out for me too. We look out for each other. I'm not alone anymore. I've been able to share with my friends, and many of them have asked questions and have made the aha face that lets me know that they get it. I'm easier to explain and easier to swallow with some understanding. That's all I ever wanted. If you're going to hate me, not what you think I am. I would rather you understand the dick than just assume that I am one. I'm grateful for the opportunity that I have been given to give people a window into the souls of the people that they love, that maybe went undiagnosed or are diagnosed, but are struggling with that in their own ways. I continue to write this book because of the response that I've been given since coming out. People need help. Suicide bothers me a great deal. I want to help people avoid it with understanding and connection. A friend of mine wrote me a few days ago at 4:30 a.m. with tears in his eyes telling me about his dad who has Aspergers. I was literally just bawling, sitting on my couch at 4:30 a.m. in the morning watching this video. We found out a few years ago that my dad has Aspergers and had most likely been misdiagnosed with bipolar since his 20s. Decades of lithium and antidepressants rotted his kidneys, which he's dealing with now, but I empathize so much with your story. Just know I truly thank you for sharing this. It helps the world to know more about Asperger's, and this video helped me to understand my dad more and understand you more, for that matter. Very clear, very brave, and I just appreciate you so much. Love you, brother. People want to be seen. People want to be heard. People want to be understood. There is no exception to this rule. If this book can help someone understand themselves, a parent, a child, or a spouse, then I will have done my job. The med students in the hallways of the VA hospitals can keep their diagnosis to themselves. I found something that explains me: autism. Since accepting that I have Asperger's, I have felt rejuvenated in a lot of ways. I have books upon books and blogs and YouTube videos full of great content about autism and Asperger's, and I feel more connected to the world. I am constantly learning new things about myself and getting suggestions from other people that live with ASD just by reading and watching. We live in a much better world than we did in the 1920s. Hell, we live in a much better world than we did in the 1990s. In the 90s, I was stupid. I was a theater type, a faggot, a retard. Today, I am autistic. I can live with that and everything that goes along with it. This is my life algorithm. I have never shared it with anyone before, but it has been close to me for a long time. At the time when the night was the darkest and I was my most depressed, the most alone, and the most isolated, I asked myself, is this world a better place because I am here? Can it be? Am I a force multiplier? Can I change all the things that I hate about the world for someone else? Remember that. Even though right now you may feel like the world is worse off for having you in it, you were there for someone when they needed you to be. At some point in your life, you were clutch. Be clutch again. One of my favorite people on planet Earth is Pastor Rudy Gonzalez. He runs an organization called Excerpt Ministries that combats human trafficking. I enjoy him immensely. I am not a religious man, but I enjoy inspiring religious people. And I often end up working with them on passion projects. He remembers thinking, how could God let this happen? He says at this moment that God spoke to him and told him, how can you let this happen? And told him to go where there is no church and build one. He is an incredible human being. He is a force multiplier. More good is done because he exists. So, can you be a force multiplier? Can the world be a little brighter for someone because you're in it? I certainly think so. Don't get so mixed up in figuring out what's wrong with you that you forget to celebrate everything that is wonderful and unique. Make accommodations for your deficiencies and then find ways to live in your greatness. If nothing else, take some time to understand you. Even if no one else will, it is in the understanding that you will find the compassion. You don't need anyone's permission to take ownership of yourself. My understanding of my own autism and others throughout history, as well as people in this current autistic community, has made me feel less alone, more understood, and a whole lot less broken. I feel zero desire for a cure. I feel alive, well, and whole. I don't need any sympathy. I feel I wouldn't give up my autism for anything because I would be giving up something that is quintessentially a part of me. I know it. I know what to call it now. I don't need to seek anyone's permission on how to identify with myself. Thank you guys for watching. Tomorrow, we will be reading chapter 15, My Autistic Body, Sensory Joy, and Avoiding Meltdowns. This series will continue, and you can find the whole series on my YouTube channel, David Serpa at eXp Realty, on the playlist Unmasking Asperger's Syndrome. Thank you for watching.